Now, depending on the type of soil will depend on how the shape of the pore spaces are. Interestingly enough, you can take a sandy soil, and sand is kind of like stacking marbles on top of each other in the soil. And they kind of overlap, you know, when you put marbles into a bowl, they don't just stack on top of each other, they roll around until they try to fill in as many voids as they can, but still there's passages around the marbles. And you can see airspace all around the marbles. Well, when you put marbles in a bowl like that, you end up with about 26% airspace. Interestingly, it compacts itself. If all the round balls are exactly the same size, you could fill this room with ping pong balls, you'd have about 26% porosity or airspace in the room, and the rest would be ping pong balls. That's as tight as they can nest together as they stack around each other to fill up the room. Now, and that's pretty low. You know, most soils are going to be 30, 40, 50% pore space. So those things stack in pretty tight. Well, what happens in a soil, of course, as plants grow in it, the roots expand the soil out, push it up, give bigger areas than the little voids just around the particles. So the organic matter, as it decays, leaves bigger spots in there. Then you got the little bugs pushing through, and as they work their way through the soil, they spread it out and make little tunnels through it, and those tunnels remain in shape, and so you get more airspace in those spots and so on. And like if I had ping pong balls in here and made a tunnel through them, no, I'd get more pore space overall. Same concept, looking at it from a different perspective. But that is kind of the concept of where we're at as far as big particles. Now, when we start mixing particle sizes, what happens? Well, if we had ping pong balls and threw marbles in with them, now the marbles are going to fit in the small spaces around the ping pong balls, and our porosity goes down. We start filling in more voids. And we mix in a bunch of what would be BBs in there along with that, and we filled in all kinds of more voids, and we can get to the point where we almost totally compact that soil, or this room, full of round objects. Because the smallest rounds will fit in around the medium-sized rounds, will fit in around the bigger rounds, and pretty soon there's not a whole lot of space left, because we're filling in all the holes as we go. Then we turn around and take some of those particles and make them look like cornflakes and put in this room, and then we throw cornflakes in the middle of all those voids as well, along with the BBs and the marbles and the ping pong balls. Well, that's like the little clay particles. You know, those little cornflakes, those are those platey type flecks of material that are going to stack in there too. And so that kind of gives you a feel of what's happening in the ground, supersized. You know, look at it as a supersized soil. Well, the good news is that, yeah, and boy, we can compact that. You know, we go out here and build a road. First thing we want to do is pound all the air out of that ground. And that's what they do when they build a road. They keep driving over it and over and over and over and over it, and all they're doing is squishing the air out of that ground. That's their whole purpose on that base layer, is to try to just absolutely squish the air right out of it before they start putting the rock on it. Because they want it as stable as possible. The only way to make it stable, get the air out of it. Then we'll put the rock base on top of that. And away we go, we can build a road. Well, we don't have to do exactly the opposite when we're growing a plant. We want to have as much porosity as possible. So now we want to, instead of crushing all those pore spaces out, we want to try to stimulate more pore spaces. So we're going to use things like cultivation, fluff the soil. Try to eliminate how many times you drive across the field in a crop year. The more passes you make across that field with tires, the more compaction you get. You'd rather not drive on the field, if you can at all help it. So there's tillage, putting organic material, blending it back into the top layer. Blend all that stubble back in after you grow a crop like wheat. You know, what's the other options are? They can bale it and take it off the field, or they can burn it. You burn it and then you leave no residual to blend back into that soil. And so all you're working with then is just the parent material. And you've taken out your organic matter. Now, I'm not saying you should never burn. There's times when it makes sense to burn a field. But it's a rare occurrence that it really makes sense, especially in irrigated fields.
What else would you put in the soil other than organic material to keep that?
Other things to put in the soil besides organic material was the question. Well, I'm not sure there's anything that you can add outside. You know, you can bring in other soil and blend in. We do that on turf. You know, we go in and we top dress. So we do that on the surface to help gain good porosity on the surface by bringing in sand. Very expensive process. You know, if you're going to do that to a field of wheat, you'd be out of the wheat growing business in a minute, because it'd bankrupt you. But when we're doing it on golf greens, it makes all the sense in the world. And what we're doing is we're putting large particles on the surface, going in and punching holes in the ground, creating pore space, I mean big pores, and then putting very large granular sand in those holes so that there's lots of permeability, lots of potential intake of the water into that soil. So we can create that. And in turf, where we have a high valued crop effectively, we can afford to do that. But it's one of the rarities where we can bring an outside agent in and put in the soil to make that work. Now, what also can be done is there are, you know, people have done things like put worms, and they'll grow worms and put worms out in the ground. And the worms do create a good environment for plants. And back about 10-15 years ago, there was a real boom in that industry. They thought that was going to be the greatest thing since sliced bread. Go grow worms, sell worms to everybody, make your million growing worms. Because everybody's going to want worms. Well, they work, but they're not the cure-all, for sure. Lots of cultivation practices are done in agriculture to get away with this. We do things like subsoiling. Take in a great big long shank, go down 2 feet deep, and rip it, or 18 inches deep, and break up that plow pan that's been developing for years and years and years. Now, they have the equipment, they can do that now. I mean, you couldn't have done that 30 or 40 years ago, but you can now. And you need one big hombre tractor, because it's breaking up the world down there, but it can be done.
It's called a cat.
Yeah, big cat.
Big.